The grandeur of the evening was a stark contrast to the silence in the car. Ethan Marlowe, one of the wealthiest bachelors in the city, sat in the driver's seat, his grip firm on the wheel. Beside him sat Elena, his housemaid, her hands nervously folded in her lap. The gold-embroidered invitation to his ex-fiancée's wedding rested in the compartment between them, its edges worn from where he had clenched it too many times. Ethan wasn't a man to avoid confrontation, but tonight, a deep discomfort stirred within him. He hadn't wanted to attend the wedding, but something unspoken compelled him. It wasn't about closure, it was something more elusive, something he couldn't quite name. "Elena," he began, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine, "thank you for agreeing to come with me. I know this isn't exactly your idea of a good evening." She smiled faintly, her usual warm demeanor subdued. "It's an honor, Mr. Marlowe. You've done so much for me and my family. If my presence helps, even a little, I'm happy to be here." Ethan glanced at her. She looked elegant in the emerald green dress he had chosen, her hair cascading in soft waves. For a moment, he was struck by how out of place she seemed, yet somehow perfect for the evening ahead. Elena wasn't like the women he usually surrounded himself with, polished, poised, and ambitious. She was grounded, humble, and radiated a quiet strength he had come to rely on. As they arrived at the grand estate where the wedding was being held, a valet opened the door for Elena, and Ethan rounded the car to offer her his arm. She hesitated before taking it, her unease evident. The chatter of guests and the soft strains of a string quartet drifted toward them as they approached the opulent entrance. Inside, the room was a dazzling display of wealth and extravagance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, and the scent of roses filled the air. Ethan spotted his ex-fiancée, Victoria, across the room, her radiant smile directed at a man who could only be her groom. Seeing her, Ethan's chest tightened. He had loved her once, or so he thought, but their relationship had been built on appearances and expectations rather than genuine connection. Elena's presence seemed to steady him as they navigated the sea of guests. Whispers followed them, people speculating about the woman on his arm. Some recognized Elena from her modest role in Ethan's household, their curiosity tinged with disdain. But she held her head high, her demeanor unshaken. As they approached Victoria, she turned, her expression faltering for the briefest moment before recovering. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, "I didn't think you'd come." "Victoria," Ethan replied, his tone cordial. "I wouldn't miss it." He gestured toward Elena. "This is Elena, my guest for the evening." Victoria's eyes flicked to Elena, her smile tight. "Charmed," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. The evening progressed with a mix of awkward encounters and forced pleasantries. But as the night unfolded, something extraordinary began to happen. Elena's genuine kindness and unpretentious charm started to draw people in. Guests who had initially dismissed her found themselves captivated by her warmth. She spoke with the elderly, danced with the children, and even charmed the bride's skeptical parents. Ethan watched in amazement as the woman who had quietly cared for his home and his life became the unexpected heart of the evening. For the first time, he saw her not just as his maid, but as someone remarkable, a woman whose presence could transform a room, whose spirit could touch lives. And then, something even more unexpected occurred. Victoria approached Elena during a lull in the evening. Ethan, watching from a distance, felt a pang of unease. He couldn't hear their conversation, but the look on Victoria's face shifted, from guarded to something softer, almost wistful. When Elena returned to his side, there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "What did she say to you?" Ethan asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Elena hesitated, then smiled. She said, "She envies me." "Envy you?" Ethan echoed, incredulous. "She said I have something she never could, a sense of peace, of knowing who I am and what truly matters." Ethan was silent, her words settling over him like a revelation. As the night drew to a close, Ethan realized the evening had turned into something far more profound than he had anticipated. It wasn't just about facing his past or finding closure, it was about seeing the truth of his life through new eyes. And in Elena, he saw a future he hadn't dared to imagine. The wedding ended with a grand flourish, fireworks illuminating the night sky as the couple shared their first dance. Ethan and Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, their presence understated yet oddly magnetic. For Ethan, the spectacle seemed distant, like watching a play in which he no longer had a role. His attention was drawn instead to Elena, who observed the scene with quiet wonder. "Thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "For what?" Elena turned to him, her soft brown eyes reflecting the golden glow of the fireworks. "For being here. For being you." His voice wavered slightly, surprising even himself. "I didn't realize how much I needed someone like you tonight." Elena smiled, though a trace of sadness lingered in her expression. "You're welcome, Mr. Marlowe. But I think you give me too much credit. Sometimes, it's not about who's with us, it's about what we're ready to see." Her words struck a chord deep within him, though he couldn't quite articulate why. As the final burst of fireworks faded into the night, Ethan offered her his arm, and together they made their way back to the car. The drive home was quieter than the journey there, but it was a different kind of silence, one that felt less heavy and more reflective. Ethan stole a glance at Elena, her profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. She seemed lost in thought, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. "You handled tonight with more grace than I ever could have," he admitted. "The way you spoke to everyone, even Victoria. It was remarkable." Elena chuckled softly. "It wasn't about grace, Mr. Marlowe. It was about honesty. People can sense when you're genuine. That's all I tried to be." "You make it sound so simple," he said, a hint of envy in his tone. "It is simple," she replied, turning to meet his gaze. "But simple doesn't mean easy." Her words lingered with him long after they returned to his sprawling estate. As they parted ways for the night, Ethan found himself reluctant to let the moment end. He stood in the foyer, watching her retreat toward the servants' quarters, and felt a strange pull, a desire to understand her world, her resilience, her unwavering sense of self. Over the following weeks, Ethan began to see Elena in a new light. He noticed how she treated everyone with the same respect, whether it was the gardener or a visiting business partner. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with the superficiality of the circles he had once moved in. One evening, as they sat across from each other in the modest kitchen she preferred over his grand dining room, Ethan asked, "How did you become this unshakable? Life hasn't exactly been kind to you." Elena paused, her spoon hovering over a steaming bowl of soup. "I've had my struggles, yes. But I've learned that pain doesn't have to define you. It can teach you, if you let it." "Teach you what?" he pressed, genuinely curious. "To let go of things that don't matter," she said simply. "To hold on to what does. And to see the beauty in what you still have, even when it's not what you thought you wanted." Her words stayed with him, reshaping the way he saw his life. For years, Ethan had measured his worth in wealth, power, and status. But in Elena's presence, those things began to feel hollow. He started to question the choices that had led him here, the sacrifices he had made, and the emptiness he had tried to fill with material success. One day, as they walked through the expansive gardens of his estate, Ethan stopped abruptly. "Elena," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "what if I told you I don't want to live like this anymore? That I want something different?" She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I'd ask you what different means to you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mingling with vulnerability. "I don't know yet. I just know that this life, this facade, it's not enough. I want something real. Something meaningful." Elena's gaze softened, and she reached out, her hand brushing his arm. "Then start small, Mr. Marlowe. Find one thing that matters to you, and build from there." Her advice was deceptively simple, but it set something in motion within him. Over the next few months, Ethan began to make changes, small at first, but increasingly bold. He scaled back his business ventures, redirected his wealth toward charitable causes, and started spending more time in the community. Through it all, Elena remained by his side, her quiet wisdom guiding him. She became more than a maid, more than a confidant. She became his anchor, the steady presence that reminded him of who he wanted to become. But as Ethan's transformation unfolded, so too did a deeper realization, one that both terrified and exhilarated him. He was falling in love with Elena. Ethan wrestled with the realization for weeks. It was a complicated truth, one that came with layers of doubt and fear. Elena wasn't just his maid. She was someone whose life was woven into his in ways that blurred the lines of propriety and expectation. And yet, every time he saw her, every time she spoke with that quiet wisdom or laughed with unrestrained joy, his feelings only deepened. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was gratitude. After all, she had been his emotional compass in a time when he felt adrift. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. It was her essence, her unyielding spirit, and the way she could make even his sprawling mansion feel like a home. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan found himself pacing the library, the weight of his emotions pressing on him. He decided he couldn't keep it to himself any longer. Whether or not she felt the same, Elena deserved honesty. He found her in the greenhouse, tending to the array of plants she had convinced him to cultivate as part of his simpler life. She was humming softly to herself, a tune he didn't recognize but found soothing nonetheless. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass panels, casting a golden glow around her. "Elena," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned, startled but smiling. "Mr. Marlowe. You don't usually visit the greenhouse." "I needed to talk to you," he said, stepping closer. "And please, call me Ethan." Her brows knitted in mild confusion, but she nodded. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've been thinking about how much my life has changed since I met you. You've shown me a world beyond wealth and power, a world I didn't even know I needed. And in that process, I've come to realize something else." She tilted her head, her curiosity evident but guarded. "I care about you, Elena. More than I ever thought I could care about someone." His voice faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "You've become more than a friend, more than someone I rely on. You're the reason I feel like my life has meaning again." Elena's expression shifted, a mix of surprise, uncertainty, and something he couldn't quite place. She looked down, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her, stepping closer. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you feel, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But I couldn't keep this to myself anymore." For a long moment, the only sound was the rustling of leaves in the greenhouse. Finally, Elena looked up, her eyes glistening. "Ethan, you've become someone I admire deeply. And I can't tell you how much it means to hear you say those things. But this isn't simple." "I know it's not," he said quickly. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this shouldn't work. But I'm willing to face them if you are." Elena sighed, her shoulders sinking slightly. "It's not just about the challenges. It's about what this means for you, for your reputation, for your life. I've spent my entire life on the outside looking in, and I've seen how the world can be cruel to people like us." He reached out, taking her hand gently. "I don't care about the world, Elena. I care about you. And I don't want to live my life dictated by what people might say or think." Her eyes searched his, as if trying to discern the depth of his sincerity. Finally, she gave him a small, tremulous smile. "If you're sure about this, then maybe we can figure it out. Together." Relief and joy flooded through Ethan, and he felt a weight lift from his chest. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, as though he was finally moving toward a future that mattered. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Their relationship grew in small, quiet ways. Shared conversations over dinner, walks through the garden, moments of laughter and vulnerability. But it wasn't without its challenges. The whispers among the staff, the judgmental stares from society elites, and the self-doubt that crept into Elena's mind all threatened to undermine their fragile bond. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the smaller sitting room Elena preferred, she voiced her fears. "Ethan, I don't want to be the reason people look down on you. You've worked so hard to build your life, and I don't want to be the thing that tarnishes it." "You're not tarnishing anything," he said firmly, taking her hands in his. "If anything, you're the reason I feel like I've finally found what I was missing. Let them talk. Let them judge. None of it matters to me." His conviction gave her strength, But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. And yet, she couldn't deny the love that was growing between them, a love that was reshaping not just Ethan's life, but her own sense of what was possible. As they faced the challenges together, they began to realize that their love wasn't just about defying expectations or breaking barriers. It was about creating a new way of living, one built on authenticity, resilience, and a commitment to what truly mattered.